Hey guys, how are you all doing? This is the MMA breakdown with my predictions for UFC 179, Aldo versus Mendes 2. And I've got to say, I think this is just a god-awful card. Really, really bad. I think it's up there with 174 and what was the number? The Sacramento one. Dillashaw and Soto, 177. This is right up there with them. And if it wasn't for the main event, there's nothing on this card at all. And below the co-main event, just absolutely terrible for a pay-per-view card. You have Fabio Maldonado taking on a guy no one's ever heard of, and Hans Stringer, and a couple other fights that are just nowhere near pay-per-view caliber fights. Definitely belong on the prelims, and just really, disappointing. With 178, I thought the UFC was really making an effort to make these pay-per-views high quality again. But with this, they're taking a big step back, I think. And for the rest of 2014, I'm looking forward to all of the pay-per-views. I think the Mexico card is looking really good, 180. The Hendricks Lawler card, I think, obviously, a couple of title fights there. Great stuff. The main event for this card was from this was the original card they canceled, 176, I think it was, back in August, where Aldo was supposed to fight Mendes in LA, and they canceled that, and it just seems they really can't, that had a big effect, and they couldn't make something good out of that. But I think it's a terrible card. This little 2-week layoff we've had from UFC action, I've been really enjoying it, and I'm not ready to go back, and especially not to this. I think it's a horrible card, and I'm gonna watch it anyway, but if you're stronger-willed than me, I highly encourage you to not watch this, and hopefully this tanks on pay-per-view, and hopefully the UFC realizes they can't do something like this ever again. Honestly, the prelim card looks like it has some more interesting fights than even the undercard, the main card here. So not good stuff. But enough of that. Let's get to the predictions. Starting off with the Fight Pass preliminary card at lightweight, Fabrizio Camoes taking on Tony Martin. Fabrizio Camoes came back to the UFC a couple years ago. I think he fought Tommy Hayden, and that was his only win. Dropped his next couple of fights to Melvin Guillard and Jim Miller. Although against Melvin Guillard, that went the distance, and he was able to get his back at one point. And against Jim Miller, was really lighting him up on the feet early in that fight before getting taken down and submitted. Miller was able to submit him from his back, which was pretty impressive. But Camoes, obviously jiu-jitsu based fighter, decorated jiu-jitsu guy, I believe, and it's definitely his strength is on the ground. Tony Martin has had 2 fights in the UFC, made his debut against Rashid Magomedov. Got him in an armbar early in that fight and looked like it was very close. And once Magomedov was able to get out of that, was able to control the rest of that fight. And then against Beneil Dariush in his last fight, Martin looked strong early, had some good in close boxing, was able to force Dariush up against the fence and use some good close range striking there, but couldn't deal with the technical striking of Dariush as the fight went on, and once it got to the ground, really had nothing there and got submitted with the arm triangle choke. So Camoes, obviously, if he gets to the ground, I think there's a big advantage there, and I think he could probably get the submission. On the feet, I'm not too sure. We haven't seen too much of Camoes, although I did think he looked good for the brief time he was standing with Jim Miller. Tony Martin has also looked decent on the feet, early in his fight against Dariush. I'm going to go with Camoes, just because Martin struggled with the ground game a bit. But I wouldn't be surprised if Martin is the more evolved fighter. Right now, Camoes seems to be a guy who is in the UFC before and released before, and on his second stint now in the UFC. But so Martin may be able to take this, but I'll go with Camoes. Next up at lightweight, Gilbert Burns taking on newcomer Christos Giagos, who I know nothing about. Gilbert Burns, though, had a great fight against Andreas Stahl in his last fight. A really back-and-forth fight that I actually thought Stahl won that fight. But it was really back and forth. Burns was able to get some takedowns in there. He was able to land some stuff on the feet too. Seemed like a decent, well-rounded fighter. Good striking, good ground game, good wrestling. But I'm not going to make a pick here, which is just my policy. If one guy is making their debut and I don't know anything about them, I stay away from that, and I can't say anything about Giagos' game. But Burns, I think, looked like a pretty solid guy making his debut in the UFC, so I would expect him to look good here and win this fight, but I'm not going to make an official pick there. So moving on to the Fox Sports 1 preliminary card at featherweight, Felipe Arantes taking on Andre Fili. An okay fight. Interested to see Fili get back in there. Had a couple of solid performances. His debut against Jeremy Larson, who I think was a pretty ineffective and a low-level fighter. Looked great against Jeremy Larson, very aggressive, was just all over him, letting his hands go, and was able to get the finish in the second round in that fight, and then took on Max Holloway, who's just coming off of a great win, great knockout over Khorassani a couple weeks ago. But Holloway, I think, is still one of the most underrated fighters in the UFC, and I think he's definitely a top 10 featherweight. And Fili was able to hang in there with him, seemed to run out of gas, as I remember, fairly early in that fight, but was able to stick around on the feet against Holloway, which is not an easy thing to do, especially these days. But in the third round, got submitted. Holloway pulled for a guillotine and was able to get the submission there. And Felipe Arantes, I think, has been a pretty inconsistent fighter. Doesn't seem to really ever have a game plan. Doesn't really have a dominant skill, and doesn't really seem to be well-rounded. On the feet, he looks lost a lot of times. I thought against Kevin Souza, he just didn't have an answer for Souza's striking at all. Has wins over Pepe Castro, was able to get on top of him and ground and pound him out pretty quick. And against Maximo Blanco, I actually thought that was a back and forth fight, and I think I had Blanco winning that fight, but just doesn't seem to be very effective with any one part of his game. And I think Fili, if he doesn't blow himself out, I think he can overwhelm Arantes early. I think he'll control the striking, but Fili's a little too eager and blows his wad a bit. I think Arantes could take over with the wrestling, get him down, and win on position. But I'm going to take Andre Fili here, possibly to get a finish, but I think it's more likely it goes the distance. Next up at flyweight, Scott Jorgensen taking on Wilson Reis. Two guys who dropped down from bantamweight recently. Scott Jorgensen having a couple fights under his belt at flyweight. It hasn't looked good at all. His first fight at flyweight against Zach Makovsky, right from the opening bell, nearly got knocked out. Was getting hit by Makovsky, and just the punches seemed to really be hurting him. Was able to last the 3 rounds in that fight, but didn't seem competitive. And against Jussier Formiga, I'll give Jorgensen a pass on that one. I mean, he got dropped with a headbutt. But then against Danny Martinez, an unranked fighter, again, nearly got knocked out and really was able to escape with a very narrow decision win there. Had to rely on his wrestling to get the takedowns because he just couldn't stand with Martinez. Got dropped on several occasions, nearly put out. So I think Jorgensen is pretty much he's pretty helpless at flyweight. And I really think he needs to go back up to bantamweight or just retire because, he really has nothing here from what he's shown. Wilson Reis, just making his, coming off of his flyweight debut, and he didn't look too good either. I was really impressed with this fight against Yuri Alcantara, who's becoming one of the elite guys at bantamweight. And Reis, I actually thought had a case for winning that fight. It was pretty close, even dropped Alcantara early in that fight. Real strong grappler, another decorated jiu-jitsu guy, heavy top game, but against Joby Sanchez in his flyweight debut, was able to take the back standing a lot, was working for that rear naked choke, but could never finish it. And then I think it was in the 2nd or 3rd round, got nailed with a head kick from Joby Sanchez, who just wasn't in that fight at all up to that point, and nearly knocked him out. So, I think that's a little bit, that's a cause for concern there. I think, the weight, he might have depleted himself a bit, dropping down to flyweight. Didn't seem to have the gas that he did against Alcantara at bantamweight, and didn't seem to be as effective with his takedowns in that fight, and couldn't put a newcomer, Joby Sanchez, away. But I'm still going to take Reis here, especially how Jorgensen's been fighting his last couple of fights, really relying on the wrestling. I think Reis will be able to out-grapple him, being the better jiu-jitsu and jiu-jitsu guy and the better grappler. I think Reis wins this. Wouldn't be too surprised if he submits Jorgensen or even hurts him on the feet, but two guys that I think don't really belong at flyweight, even Reis, still green in this weight class. I don't think he's going to get anything done here, but I'm going to take Reis to win this fight. Next up at lightweight, Jan Cabral taking on Yuki Kotani. Kotani coming off of his debut loss to Norman Park, where I thought he just looked terrible. looks like he was fed to Park, and I'm really not as high on Park as everyone else is at all. I think he's a pretty just average fighter, and he was able to make Kotani look terrible. That was Park's first finish in the UFC. Wasn't able to get anywhere near a finish before that, even from Tough Nations, and he just ran over Kotani. So I think Kotani is just a pretty bad fighter based on that performance. And young Cabral, Tough Brazil 2 veteran, jiu-jitsu guy, decent grappler. He got a submission win on the show, I believe, and had to leave the house. I think had a hand injury, but since coming into the UFC, had a win over David Mitchell, who I think is a low-level fighter, but was able to out-grapple him effectively. But then his last fight against Zach Cummings, was doing some crafty stuff from his guard, and off the back I think had Cummings in a triangle in that first round, but was just out-positioned and out-muscled on the ground by Cummings, who's the bigger fighter. And other than his grappling game, which doesn't seem to be good enough to really be effective against the higher level guys, and doesn't seem to have much on the feet, aside from his grappling game, I don't think he has anything else really to offer. But I think this should be a pretty easy walkover fight for Cabral, at least to get an easy decision win. I don't know if he submits him, but Cabral should win this. Next up at welterweight, this is the most interesting and most competitive fight on the card, I think. Well, maybe not. Well, yeah, I think this is the most evenly matched fight on the card. I really do. And more interesting to me than anything on the main card, aside from the main event and maybe the co-main. But William Macario taking on Neil Magny, a couple of tough veterans. Macario, his nickname is Padalino, from Tough Brazil 2. Made it to the finals and lost to Leonardo Santos. That was a competitive fight, but got dropped by a punch from Santos and submitted on the ground by an arm triangle choke. And Neil Magny from Tough 16 made it to the semifinals in the house, got knocked out with some brutal elbows by Mike Ricci. But since coming in the UFC, it seemed to really just cross a threshold and really become a guy to pay attention to, and a pretty talented fighter. One thing to note, this will be Magny's 5th fight, I believe, in 2014. I'm checking that right now. Yeah, this will be his 4th fight. His 5th fight in 2014 and his 4th fight since May, so that's a lot of fights in a short amount of time, and that could backfire on him, potentially. But he's really grown over this 4-fight win streak he's been on. Started off with a win over Gasanu Mulatov. He's a good range striker, has a good jab, and against Tim Means, he really picked up the pace, pressed him a lot. I think hurt Means at one point, and his next fight against Rodrigo de Lima, after getting badly out-grappled in the first round, dominated pretty much, was able to come out in the second round and get the quick knockout. And his last fight against Alex Garcia, I actually thought he lost that fight. Garcia was able to take him down, hold him down, and Magny was really looking to clinch and kind of grapple on the feet, tried to take Garcia's back a lot on the feet, and really should have lost that fight, but was kind of happy to see him escape with a win there and keep his win streak alive. So, Magny's had he's had 4 fights since Macario's last fight, and he's really grown over that streak, as I said, has gotten a lot better. I think he's more dangerous with his striking, more active with his striking. And Macario seemed to really be an unpolished striker in Tough Brazil. Threw a lot of haymakers and bombs. Didn't seem to really have refined striking, but then an effective striker. I think he got a couple of finishes there in the house, but then the UFC took on Bobby Volker and really seemed to refine things, sharpen up his striking a lot. Seemed very patient, was picking his shots very well, working at jab, and really beat up Volker, who, you know, is not really you know, a good test for a high-level fighter in the division, but still, I thought he made big improvements with his striking. So, and we haven't seen him in a year, so this is going to be a pretty interesting fight. I think Magny, though, still will be more technical. I think he'll have the better jab. Macario, though, I think he could, you know, turn it up and make it more of a brawl. And if he does that, I think he could has the potential to hurt Magny. He does pack a lot of power in his punches. And Neil Magny, not a bad grappler either. If he's the one initiating the wrestling and taking you down, he's he has some decent top control. But I'm just not sure. I think it's a pretty even matchup. I'll give the edge to Magny, just being a little more technical and you know, having a lot more fights in the UFC than Macario at this point. So I'm gonna go with Magny to win a decision, but it should be a competitive fight. And onto the main card, which again I think is absolutely awful. I mean, these first couple of fights here, these should never be on a pay-per-view ever, and I don't care what's at the top. Really just awful. But lightweight, Carlos Diego Ferreira taking on Beneil Dariush, and this is a good fight, I think, an interesting fight. You know, two guys working their way up the division and have had some nice fights, but you know, this isn't a fight that I want part of my $50 going to. It's not. I'm paying $50 for the pay-per-view, and every fight that's bought with that money, I want to feel like you know, is a fight that deserves to be paid for. And these first three fights, I absolutely you know, wouldn't pay a dime for these. But lightweight, Ferreira taking on Dariush. I'm taking Ferreira. Had a great debut win over Colton Smith. Quickly took him out, got him down with a judo throw, and was able to get the rear naked choke without even taking the back. And his next fight took out Ramsey Nijum, which was back and forth a little bit there. Nijum was able to land some stuff early on in the first round, but eventually Ferreira was able to land the finishing blows that put Nijum out, put him down. And Nijum was a guy who knocked out Dariush a couple fights ago. So, you know, a lot of people, you know, don't like MMA math, don't think it's a valid way of analyzing fights, but, you know, I do like MMA math, and I think it works most of the time. I think, you know, Ferreira being able to knock out Nijum, who really ran over Dariush, I think he'll be able to eventually overwhelm Dariush here. Dariush, I thought, showed really good patience in his last fight against Tony Martin. Again, early in that fight was getting worked over with the striking, but being patient, he was able to overcome Tony Martin with technical striking, and has a real slick ground game. Submitted Tony Martin, and also against Charlie Brenneman was able to drop him and submit him, which doesn't mean too much, you know, because Brenneman just gets dropped by everyone. But I don't see Dariush's ground game. I don't think it's going to be good enough to hang with a native Brazilian. who showed a very good judo and submission game against Colton Smith. So I think on the feet, Ferreira is going to be able to land the bigger blows and finish Dariush at some point. So I'm taking Ferreira, and I think he's looks like a fun fighter, a guy to pay attention to. I'm not sure how far he can go. I don't think very far, but this is a decent fight, but should be on the prelims. Next up at featherweight, just a terrible fight. Darren Elkins taking on Lucas Martins, and again, terrible in the sense that it's on pay-per-view part of this card. Decent matchup actually, but again, this is a prelim quality fight. Darren Elkins, I think, has really had his moment in the sport. Just not a terribly well-rounded guy, hard-nosed, gritty wrestler with rudimentary striking that he's able to make effective through heart and aggression. But you saw he was on a 5-fight win streak at one point. He's had wins over Brandao, Steven Seiler, but then when he takes on the higher level guys like Chad Mendes, when he took on Chad Mendes and Jeremy Stevens, absolutely outclassed on the feet, could not hang with them at all. Mendes taking him out very quickly, and Jeremy Stevens just really dominating him and beating him up badly. Elkins just does not have the skill on the feet to hang with high-level strikers, which Lucas Martins definitely appears to be. Elkins also has a win over Hioki. It was a good, scrappy win, but really has to use that wrestling to get wins against better fighters, and he's not going to be able to just, will his way to a knockout win here with his very kind of rudimentary striking. Lucas Martins, on the other hand, does seem to be a very skilled striker. And if you compare his performance against Jeremy Larson at featherweight, was that at featherweight or lightweight? I know that was at featherweight, knocked out Jeremy Larson, and then dropped down to bantamweight to take on Junior Hernandez, and was able to hurt him early and get the submission there, and then back at featherweight in his last fight, took out Alex White. And if my original point, if you compare his performance against Alex White to his performance against Jeremy Larson, seems like a completely different fighter. Against Larson, he was brawling, got hurt himself in that fight. Against Alex White, very patient, very technical, picked his shots very well, was able to take him out cleanly, and waited until the third round to do so. So I was very impressed with that. And I think he's just going to pick apart Elkins from the outside. Elkins is a hard-nosed, gritty guy. He could make something happen with the wrestling, but I don't see it happening. I think Martins is just too dangerous with his hands and too technical to let Elkins, get in with his wrestling. So I'm taking Martins here, and I think he could get a finish. Next up at light heavyweight, just an awful fight. I mean, it's embarrassing that this is on the main card. Fabio Maldonado taking on Hans Stringer. Maldonado, as novel as a guy as he is, with his crazy brawling style, the huge amounts of damage he takes, even with that novel fighting style, he can be effective, and he can really confuse guys with his real funky striking rhythm, throwing shots from odd angles. He's been able to get wins over guys. John Vellante, who was able to use his wrestling effectively early in that fight. Maldonado proved to have the better gas tank and was able to overwhelm him as that fight went on. So wins over Joey Beltran. Even hung in there with Teixeira for a bit. Almost went to the third round. So, Maldonado can win fights against, lower level competition. Got steamrolled by Miocic in his last fight, which was at heavyweight, which he had no business taking that fight. But Hans Stringer, don't know much about him other than watching his debut fight against Francimar Barroso, who is another fighter who I think is pretty terrible. But don't remember that fight terribly well. I remember it being just a very underwhelming, slow-paced kickboxing match, and Stringer just landing more strikes. Pretty tall guys, I remember. I think he's going to be taller than Maldonado, but I think Maldonado, with his experience and just that unorthodox boxing attack, I think he's going to be able to get a win over Stringer here. And I really have no idea why Stringer, why they're putting him against Maldonado on the main card here. It doesn't make any sense to me. Especially with it being in Brazil. I mean, that makes sense why Maldonado's in this spot, but why not give him another Brazilian light heavyweight? Doesn't make sense to me, but just terrible that Hans Stringer, who fought on a Fight Pass card back in March, and I really don't think anyone knows who he is fighting here on the main card, but taking Maldonado. Next up, another light heavyweight fight, Glover Teixeira taking on Phil Davis, and finally we get to a meaningful fight. I've got to take Teixeira. Phil Davis, after his early days in the UFC, where he was really able to dominate guys with wrestling and really able to come up with some crafty submissions, hasn't been able to use that wrestling for a while, really at all. Was able to take Machida down a bit. I still don't know how he was able to stand with Machida. I really think that was just Machida being too conservative. I think if Machida just decided that he wanted to finish him, I think he could have done that easily at any point in that fight. His hands are terrible. Just watch the fight with Vinny Magalesh. His striking just seems very awkward, very stiff. Doesn't have a good form on his jab. And then obviously in his last fight against Rumble Johnson, just got beat up. Could not get anything going with the wrestling. And kind of surprising that he wasn't more desperate to get the takedown. Just kind of content to sit there and take a beating. And Teixeira, obviously a very good striker, big power. He's able to be really aggressive and remain defensive and technical. I think he can hurt Davis easily standing. Teixeira hasn't had too many strong American wrestlers yet in the UFC. He did against Bader and was actually able to take Bader down. And Bader, I think, was able to get him down too as well. But I don't see Davis being able to control him here with the wrestling. I think Teixeira is a good enough wrestler himself, very well-rounded fighter, and just too mean and too aggressive. I think is really going to hurt Phil Davis here, and I don't think Phil Davis has much of a chance, really. Got to go with Teixeira, and I think Davis, unless he's made some major changes, I think he's kind of peaked, and it's unfortunate because he was a guy I was high on and really enjoyed some of his earlier performances, but I think Teixeira can get the knockout here. In the main event, Jose Aldo taking on Chad Mendes for the featherweight belt. Not a rematch that I'm terribly excited about. I picked Mendes to beat Aldo the first time. and that was a really big mistake. And while Mendes has really made great strides in his striking since then, he hasn't proved it against another high-level striker. Really hasn't, and that's basically my feelings about Mendes at this point. Knocking out Darren Elkins, who, we talked about, who was Yatsin Meza. I mean, who are these guys? Even Clay Guida recently. Who was the other guy he knocked out? Am I missing one? Cody McKenzie. I mean, terrible guys. And then Nick Lentz in his last fight, Nick Lentz I think is pretty overrated. I mean, he's a solid fighter, a fringe top 10 guy at featherweight. And Mendes said he was sick in that fight. Definitely looked it. I don't know if it's true or not, but I mean, Lentz, who didn't have anything for him on the feet. Mendes really couldn't do anything to put him away either. And if he comes up with any kind of half-ass effort like that with Aldo, he's going to get put out quick. The way to beat Aldo, everyone talks about how he fades late, how they're just going to be patient and then wait for that 4th and 5th round and really turn things on. I think that's just the totally wrong approach. The way to beat Aldo is a guy like Aldo is to press him early, really go after him, make him work early. These guys who think they're just going to overwhelm him late in the fight, I mean, who has that worked out for? You look at Korean Zombie, did nothing, and then in the 4th round got taken out, and I know he hurt his shoulder, but I don't buy that. The last guy, Ricardo Lamas, did nothing to Aldo, didn't engage at all, and then once we get to the end of the fight, he's down 4 rounds, totally confused, can't figure this guy out. He did get on top of him, but I mean, Aldo's not, he's not defenseless to the point where, he's just going to get knocked out and laid down in the 5th round. The one guy in the UFC who gave Aldo a real competitive fight was Mark Hominick, and Mark Hominick went after him early from the 1st round, really made Aldo work. I think I gave Hominick 2 rounds in that fight. But by the end of the fight, Aldo was very gassed and tired because he had been, in a really competitive firefight with Hominick for the whole time. Hominick was able to get on top of him and was chasing the finish in that 5th round. Hominick was on top of him, raining down big punches, and Aldo was really gassed. And he was gassed because he would, I keep saying this, making the same point. Is gassed because he was, really pushed early in that fight. And I think that's what Mendes has to do. If he lets his hands go, I think he has a chance of, he could hurt Aldo. He could land something. His hands have definitely. I mean, he's a completely different fighter striking than he was when he fought Aldo the first time. I mean, he had no knockouts really, I think, even from the WEC against, or at least not against anyone notable. And after losing to Aldo, just really got great combinations, great hand speed, big power. Seemed to get those knockouts really effortlessly, but again, not against any skilled strikers in the division. So if Mendes lets his hands go early, if he really mixes up the striking with the wrestling, I think he can be competitive with Aldo. But like you saw in that first fight with Aldo, Mendes was completely timid, very hesitant. He didn't want to strike at all. He just wanted to get that waist lock on Aldo and just hang on. And you saw once they were against the cage, Mendes tried to drag him down, and Aldo did hold the fence, but still, he was just looking for that takedown, and Aldo hit him with that big knee, knocked him out. And, you know, I don't know. I'm not convinced that Mendes is going to let his hands go here. You know, knowing what happened to him the first time, I think he does have to be a bit cautious here and patient, and I don't think that's going to work for him at all. But if he does let his hands go, you know, then it's an interesting fight. But I think Aldo's, you know, going to win another decision here. And if Mendes really just looks for that takedown, I think then the knockout will really be open for Aldo. But I'm taking Aldo, and I don't think Mendes really can do much here. Yeah, I'm taking Aldo. So those are my predictions for UFC 179, Aldo versus Mendes 2. These videos are always a bit longer than I want them to be, but if you stuck around till the end, thank you. I'll have my predictions up for the next couple of events. Rockhold versus Bisping and Shogun versus Manoa. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Really appreciate it. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye.